everybody. Before we get into this next podcast, I want to say appreciate you joining us. Appreciate you tuning in and subscribing because, of course, you subscribe and you hit the notification bell because that's how you know that this even dropped. But also would love for you to check out 18 Alpha Fitness at 18alphafitness.com using the promo code the number one and ready to get yourself a tailor-made training program for the pipeline or just to get healthy in general, really, from Coach Edgerton. Everything he's got: kettlebell, he's got BJJ, he's got preparing for buds, preparing for Ranger School, SFAS, and of course the Air Force Special Warfare pipeline. Man, he has been there and done that. He has been coaching for a very long time. I know you recently sat down with him, Trent. I think you've known him the longest out of all of us.
Well, maybe Aaron. I don't know. But
no, you have.
An 18 Alpha is a team leader on a Green Beret team, for anybody that doesn't know. And you know what Kevin's going to do as a leader? He's going to lead you to success down one of these pipeline paths because he's done all the stuff. And that was super corny what I just said, but it's true. Like if you need some leadership, if you need some guidance, if you need someone that knows what they're talking about to give you the steps to achieve the goals that you want to achieve, Kevin's your man.
I love the level of self-awareness where you're in the middle of an ad read talking about Kevin Edgerton and the goodness that he does, and you say something wrong, and in your head, you can't even let it go. You just cringe so hard. Hey, as a graduate of one of Kevin's programs, I did his BJJ program, the kettlebell for BJJ program. Man, it's awesome. My knee is finally feeling good again. I'm ready to get back on the mats. And if you don't think I'm going to go to Kevin and try to get back in some sort of shape, I'm probably going to use the BJJ program again. So go over to 18 Alpha Fitness, use our code, the number one ready, and you'll get a sweet discount. Tell them we sent you. It'd be awesome. And again, this is for everybody. Are you an old guy that wants to get in good shape? You want to be just a little bit more mobile, a little bit more strong? It doesn't matter if you're not going through a pipeline. Kevin can get you there. So go to 18alphafitness.com, use our code the number one ready for a sweet discount.
That's right. And then while you're at it, if you need some equipment to help prepare or use some of that equipment to help prepare for any kind of pipeline, you can go over to onesready.com, get some of Attack Elite's merch, or not their merch, but their equipment. And then you don't need to put in a promo code. The discount's already built in. And then while you're there, you can also pick up a Ones Ready piece of merch. That is actually merch. And that actually gives you like a 5 to 10% boost anytime you're wearing it or you have it hanging up in your garage or something like that. It's actually scientifically proven to do that.
It's the science. Follow the science. If you hang a Ones Ready flag in your gym, if you have a Ones Ready shirt on, if you throw that Attack Elite ruck on, which is one of the best rucks out there, it's a hard frame ruck. It's really going to help you get those feet conditioned. Time on feet is something that we talk about a lot. Go to attackelite.com or just go to onesready.com. While you're there, pick up a sweet shirt. We just restocked. We got new shirts coming out and limited stuff. If you had that Attack Elite, that watch on there that is so popular, we had a long conversation about how good that watch is, and you should definitely go check it out. That tactical watch is the heat. I definitely recommend it for every single person out there. You should go wear that bad boy. But if you throw that tactical watch on, you throw the ruck on, and maybe you got yourself a little hero tee on, that's at least 25% improvement. Immediate, right off the rip.
30 seconds off your run time easily.
Every time, easily. Yeah, go check out Attack Elite. Those guys are awesome too, by the way.
That's right. Yeah. And then as we go into this next episode with retired Chief Kevin Laliberte, who is now running Surf Brigade, which is a 501c3 or 501c that I don't know if the 3 exists or not. I don't know. I don't know all those. But he is
a nonprofit?
Yeah, he's a nonprofit.
Then it's 501c3. You're
there
good.
You go.
You were right. You're correct.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, it's not. Yeah.
You start rattling off numbers and letters, and you're like, I think that's what it is. But
that might be what it is. Yeah. Who knows?
So he runs Surf Brigade. They're out of Santa Rosa, Florida, helping veterans and helping other people kind of get through whatever they're working on. But he's a retired TACP who went Special Operations TACP, who did some other stuff as well.
Yeah, really interesting story. Yeah. I wasn't there. I actually saw it pop up when it got processed yesterday. I'm excited to listen to it. So you won't see me on this episode. So that's another reason to stick around. So I'll be excusing myself.
Even more people can tune in now.
Yeah.
Hilarious. We missed out on all the jokes about him being a TACP and splashing around in the water because Aaron wasn't there and we were just being nice about it. So
nice.
And then he transferred into the Space Force at that point. So, and he's tabbed Ranger. So he probably is the first Space Ranger.
Oh, wow. Dang, I'm going to have to listen to this one.
Yep.
Have fun, everybody. It's a juicy one.
That's it. All right. Enjoy. Light up. Hey,
Yep.
everybody, welcome back to the One's Ready podcast.
Yep.
I'm going to cut that part out. Yeah, so we have, I don't even know, like, since you're retired now, do you want me to just call you Kevin?
Yeah, man.
So
Yeah.
retired Chief
It's a
Kevin
Hooyah Chief.
Laliberte.
Jared, you have to say Hooyah Chief before
Hooyah
you
Chief,
address.
Hooyah Chief. Well, especially since we're going to start talking about surfing and stuff like that and being in the water. Hey,
Right.
so Kevin, dude, appreciate you joining us, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on here, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So jump right into a little bit of your background. That way everybody kind of knows like the mindset and where you're going from, where you're coming from, especially as we start to dive into the kind of Surf Brigade and everything that you have going on.
Yeah, sure. Should we like take it all the way back to
I think
the
take it all
military?
the way, at least take it all the way back to, did you always know that you wanted to go and do the job that you did, which
Mm,
we'll say you were a TACP,
yeah.
and then kind of take it from there. Did you know you always wanted to do that? How'd you train for it? And then kind of
Yeah.
from there.
That's great. Well, first of all, again, thanks for having me on here, guys. It's nice to reconnect with both of you. And Trent and I got to spend a weekend together a few weeks ago at the Lowercase Dubes block party, which was great. And it was exciting to see the veteran community coming together there as well. And that is critically important post-military and post-GWAT, and we're going to get into that a little more later, and how Surf Brigade facilitates that as well. But my accelerated background, I grew up in New Jersey, basically the suburbs of New York City, right on the other side of the river. I did not have anyone in the military in my immediate family, but I graduated high school in 1998, so I'm dating myself here a little bit, and truthfully didn't really have a lot of direction, and so I joined the military. I joined the Air Force. My first job in the Air Force, I was air transportation, so I was a plane loader, and my first base, 18 years old, was Yokota Air Base, Japan, and it was awesome.
I was going to say, that sounds fantastic.
Oh man, it was so cool. I spent the next 23 years trying to get back there. But it was not just awesome from a location perspective, but for a young man, it was a really formidable time. And it provided a lot of opportunities to really learn about myself and come out of my shell and come into my own. My very next assignment was to Osan in Korea, which was also a great assignment. I know people have mixed reviews of Korea. I think it's what you make of it, but I loved it. And at that time, I was in Korea on 9/11. So a few years into the Air Force now already in this storyline. And I also happened to be in my cross-training window at that time. I was a young senior airman, and I was all gung-ho and wanted to go to war like everyone else. And so I cross-trained into TACP. And I left Korea, went to TACP Tech School, which at the time was at Hurlburt Field, Florida. And my first TACP base, which was also my first base in the Air Force that was CONUS 4 years into the military, was Fort Benning. What was Fort Benning? Which was my timing was right, and it was the right place because I got there in 2003, and I was a brand new TACP, and they said, pack your shit, you're going to Kuwait. And I drove a Humvee from Kuwait all the way to Baghdad, fighting the whole time with 3rd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division. And, when you're a young TACP and you just want to get into the mix, man, like that's how you do it. Like you figure everything out real fast in combat. And it was exciting. And in hindsight, of course, I'm really grateful for that initial opportunity. It was also an opportunity, though, for me to prove myself. We'll probably talk about that a little more here in a while, but I think we all have different opportunities provided to us to show our peers and show our units, if we have the right stuff. And that was kind of mine as a young guy. And so when I came back from that, also on Fort Benning, happens to be the Ranger Regiment. Yeah. And at the time, all the TACPs on Fort Benning were in one building. And, the conventional guys were on one side, which is where I was, and all the HUA 75th Ranger Regiment guys were on the other. And so,
Was there like a line on the floor you couldn't cross? I'm assuming the 75th guys were like, nerds, stay away from us.
Yeah,
You guys.
they made you do push-ups every time you wanted to cross over it. But I basically grabbed one of those guys who now is, been one of my lifelong best friends, and you guys would both know him, Matty Green. I just had breakfast with him yesterday.
He's awesome.
And, he's always been so motivated, man. And back then, like, he was just on fire, man. And I grabbed his pocket and I was like, hey, dude, I want to go over to the regiment. What do I do? And it wasn't as structured then as it is now for assessment and selection going to AFSOC. But he basically said, you need to be the best at everything you do. And you need to draw enough attention to you that they think you can earn a place in this formation. And I was like, okay. And so I just went nuts, man. I volunteered for everything. I went to JTAC QC as fast as I could, airborne school, ranger school, free fall school, everything, every opportunity that there was, I jumped on it and I did the best I could. And I earned a place in as a TACP with 375. And I spent the next several years on back-to-back deployments to Iraq with 375. Which was great. And those were the best years to be over there. 2004, 5, 6. I was in Ramadi the summer of 05, the summer of 06, and with the task force at that time. And man, it was crazy. We were doing, 100 missions in 90 days, daytime missions, follow on nighttime missions. And as a JTAC then, I was dropping so much in Ramadi. I was in my prime. I can look back in it now and realize, like, dude, that was the best I ever was right then and there, just because of the volume of 9 lines that I was passing, the volume of deconfliction, and the amount of aircraft in the airspace, and the amount of activity going on the ground, all of it together. You become so good at it. You start to think differently, right? Much differently. And we'll talk about that more too. But at one point, I remember in Ramadi, Intel had numbered 500 buildings in Ramadi, and the Army JTAC program had just come out. So it was me and an Army JTAC, a Ranger JTAC on the FOB. We were on Shark Base, and we were passing so many 9 lines. I mean, every day you're getting into fights and blowing up buildings. We made a book. We sat down and made a book of 500 9 lines. And then we sent it on PDF to every aircraft that was flying our missions, because it took too long to pass these 9 lines. Yeah. We're like, hey, reference 9 line number 427, read back lines 4 and 6. And that was it, It was fantastic. So moving forward, I did that.
Kevin, real quick, before you go on, I want to highlight and you've said it several times in terms of, your rank, your E4, your E5, and it's just wild because we just posted a clip today or yesterday about the force multiplication of an E4 with a radio with CAS assets.
Yep.
So I want to get your opinion on that and hear how you think, because obviously I'm sitting here going like, well, yeah, that's how I spent the last 26 years. Like, that's what I did, doing JTAC stuff. What are your opinions on that?
Well, that's a risk conversation. Okay. What I want to tell you first, though, is one of the things I learned about being, I have learned since as I've reflected on my military career. I probably didn't realize this at the time, the depth of this, but it has affected who I am now in the business world as a employee and entrepreneur and nonprofit owner and director. When I was a JTAC, I was the guy that would sit in the room with all these JSOC planners, the best. These are the best planners in the world. These are the best officers, the best senior enlisted leaders, and I was a young E5. And so I would listen to everybody put together this fantastic plan on what they were going to do that night. And they would talk about all the ways it was going to go right. And I would sit in the back of the room and assume that they were all wrong and that the plan was not going to go the way they think it's going to. And I had to think at every phase in the operation, if it goes wrong there, how am I going to inject CAS? If it goes wrong in the next phase, how am I going to inject CAS there? And what that created is a really contrarian thought pattern that still sticks with me today. My tendency is to allow people to talk about the plan, and then I wait until the end and I ask, well, let's assume that everybody's wrong here and talk about what we're going to do then. Okay. But the byproduct of that is risk identification and mitigation. And what that means is, at the time, as a young E5, my ground force commander was able to operate at significantly higher levels of risk with his ground force than he could if I wasn't there. Okay. Yep. We would look at doing these raids, and they would ask, if we take fire from several, because this is all urban setting in Ramadi at the time, right? Buildings are on top of each other, arm's width apart. And we'd say, if we're taking fire from surrounding buildings while we're in that, what do we do? And very often the answer was, we're going to deploy CAS against it. And that was a sufficient enough answer for the commander to say, good, talk me through the next phase of the operation. And so, to your point, having a single E5 on the ground who's in his prime and knows how to work his radios and talk to aircraft and get bombs on target in very short amounts of time, it allows the commander and the entire task force to move significantly faster.
Yep.
That's crazy that you're like an easy button, like, oh, if anything goes wrong, we just are like, hey, bro, Air Force bro, can you fix this right now? And you're like, yeah. Absolutely. I've been thinking about this for weeks. I knew this was going to happen. Like, I already got it. Guys, drop on 382. You're like, okay, cool.
Oh, yeah. And you guys have probably experienced this too. It wasn't just JTAC stuff. Like, eventually, because I was talking to everything in the RODs, and eventually the assumption was I could get any aircraft to do anything. Right. So, like, if we needed medevac, I'm like, there's like task force medics here with us. They're like, go set up the HLZ and land the helicopters. And, the answer is, yeah, Roger, of course, I'm on it. And you start moving out. Right. Cargo, I was a TACP. I wasn't a CCT, but, cargo aircraft, like, we got into a pretty good tick at one point in Ramadi, and we were having speedballs delivered via airdrop. And they're like, go coordinate this airdrop. I'm like, dude, I'm okay. Okay, I'll figure it out. You just like get on with the aircraft, and you're like, hey, I'm a non-qualified airdropper. Tell me what you need, and I'll give it to you. But you figure it out, man. That's what we all did at that time, which made it such a formidable experience for a lot of us.
Yeah.
But it was great. But
that's just one of the things I wanted to highlight, is just because we talk about it, and it almost sounds like, like, well, yeah, of course we're tooting our own horn, but at the same time, when you start looking at the joint force and all the different things and capabilities and skills and mindsets too, that all of the different entities within SOCOM or within the land warfare components of each of the service, like, it's a impressive thing.
Yeah, especially. And, it's the key to joint effectiveness. I mean, I don't want to go nuts on like doctrine here, but the key is application. I mean, it's all good to talk about, but if you don't want it to be successful, it never will. And back then, I mean, nobody gave a shit what service you were in. On those deployments, I was even wearing Army uniforms. Yep. A lot of us were at the time. And to be fair, besides the guys who I was like back in garrison with, there were probably other units on same objectives that assumed I was a soldier in the Army. But it didn't matter to me at the time. It didn't matter to any of the guys that I was, attached to. We all just knew what needed to be done, and everybody, whatever you were best at, you did it.
Yep.
You didn't ask questions. Okay. And sometimes maybe you weren't the best at it, but you were in the position to do it and someone else wasn't. Right. Like maybe it was a medical situation. A lot of us have stories about that where there was a medic close by, but he didn't have access to the patient and you were there and had to do it. But again, that can have a real impact on your life. We're going to talk about that with Surf Brigade and purpose, because that can have a really significantly positive impact on your life later. But it can go in the other direction for some veterans as well. The key to that is the narrative that's behind it, which is one of the other Surf Brigade pillars we'll talk about. And you have to be very deliberate about how you revisit these experiences you've lived previously in your life, if you're going to tap into them from a constructive perspective. Okay. But after I did 375 for a couple of years, I was still on Fort Benning, and I had the opportunity to then go and be attached to the Regimental Reconnaissance Company. And I spent the next 3 years doing recce, which was really amazing. And in hindsight, that was probably the pinnacle of my, like the highest performance part of my career. I did another 3 deployments in 3 years. And we did all the sexy stuff that recce does, 25,000 foot hay hose and, week-long airfield reconnaissance, urban reconnaissance, all sorts of stuff, and a lot of very high-end training. In hindsight, though, what's interesting, and I kind of knew it was happening at the time, and it's a very small team. It was a 7-man team, and I was the only Air Force guy, right? But on a team like that, everybody is responsible for being able to do everything all the time. And so everybody on the patrol has to be able to take the point man position at any point. Everybody on the patrol needs to be able to operate every single camera, piece of radio equipment, everything. Operate every sniper system, everything. The product of maintaining such a high level of readiness in all of these different mission areas was that my JTAC skill set started to actually atrophy. Okay. Because I was not going on all the CAS trips and dropping all the bombs in Ramadi anymore. And at one point, like 2 years into recce, we found ourselves in a small engagement, which on a 7-man team, even a small firefight is a big deal. And I had 2 A-10s overhead, and we deployed some CAS with them, but my skill had atrophied so much. I was so rusty. I mean, I listened to the audio tapes afterwards and I was grossed out by myself. I'm like, dude, like, this is amateur hour. This is terrible.
What happened to you?
What happened to me? I was like, get rid of these tapes. Don't ever let anybody listen to these, right? But in my own defense, like, dude, the amount of other high performance mission areas that were deployed in conjunction with that operation, CAS was like the least thought through part, right? But it got my attention real fast. And the next and last year I spent in reconnaissance, I kind of pulled the joystick back and told the team, like, hey guys, listen, if I'm the guy on the sniper system, we're probably not doing things right. Okay. If I'm the guy that's like in the OP for long periods of time performing reconnaissance, we're probably not doing something right. Okay. I need to be the guy that's ready for that call to deploy CAS at any time.
Well, there's a couple things there. First, I like how you just say stuff like, "Oh, I ended up at the 17th, and then I ended up with RRD." Like, like these guys, they just took me. They're not super selective about, especially Air Force guys that get a role with their team, which is insane. And like the people that know that listen to the podcast, they're like, oh, dang, like you were out there with those guys. Like everybody knows what that means. But like I think that the average listener out there, like I don't think they know what that means. You know what I mean? Like it's really difficult to gain their trust and to go out with those guys, especially as like you're not a Ranger, you're an Air Force guy. So
yeah,
that's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah. I'll tell you regarding that, and I appreciate your comments on that, Trent. I think a lot of us look back on the things we did in the military, and we talk about them casually, but at the time, yeah, they were all really challenging. I mean, now, of course, I look at I go back and do some like motivational speaking, resilience speaking at some of the unit graduation speeches, things like that. And I look at the young guys. I look at the E6s that are doing reconnaissance now, and I'm like, oh, these dudes are animals. Like, they're giant and they're jacked and they're smart and they know everything about their equipment. And in my head, like part of me in my head, I'm still like 25 in my head. I'm like, I can do anything, Yeah. But then the other side of my head, I look at these guys and I feel old, and I'm like, and I ask myself, man, if I was that age now, could I do everything they're doing? Right. Yeah. I want to believe the answer is yes. But things have changed so significantly since, 20 years ago, which is crazy to say that number. It seems like yesterday, right? But the answer is, I think any of us would have, because at the time, our character was, I will do whatever it takes. That's the answer. If someone said, can you do this? I would go, the answer is yes. The answer is always yes. I'm going to die before I stop trying, right? And that approach, that character, man, that's how you earn places in those formations. But to your point, Trent, I try to tell this to young guys now, like when you're an Air Force guy working in a joint special operations environment, it can take you months. It can take you years to earn a place in that formation. Okay. And when the day comes, this is like figuratively, but in some ways, this is literal as well. When the day comes that they say fall in, and instead of you standing next to their formation, you're in it. Okay. In your head, like, I fucking made it. Okay, I'm not an outsider. I made it. These guys don't care what service I'm in. But the thing is, it can take you months or years to get there, and you can lose your place in that formation with one bad mistake, one bad day. Okay, and so you can't let it happen. Okay, people do make mistakes, but as long as you're a good teammate, and you will always do whatever it takes, man, people will see that they're mistakes and it wasn't with malice, and you hold your place in that formation. But if you can do that, the most remarkable part about it is later in life, for the rest of your life, I believe, man, that's your tribe. The guys that you were in that formation with at that time that you worked so hard to stand next to, that's your tribe that 20 years later, okay? Years later, you're going to be a retired guy who just likes to surf. And those are the guys that you're going to stay in touch with and you're going to communicate with. And that's necessary. We're going to talk about this when it comes to community as well, because later in life, you have to spend time around people who have shared experiences as you do. Okay? It's nice to think that any of us can just go anywhere and meet new people, but at some point you have to spend time with people that know where you came from without you spending a significant amount of time explaining yourself.
Yeah, it's like why it's so important to hang out with people from your childhood that knew you before you were anything, right? Like it's like a whole nother life that you live in the military, and then so you kind of detach yourself from your childhood, and then you detach yourself from like the civilian world. And it's important. And there's a certain feeling that you get around those people, right? Where you remind yourself of who you were and what you were capable of, and how some of this was cool. Because your boys aren't going to let you get away with just being like, yeah, I went to RRD. They're like, bro, let me tell you about this guy. You know what I mean? And it's nice, but they'll also keep you grounded because we also hate each other, and say terrible things all the time.
Yeah, that's right. So I did recce for a few years, and then I went to Hurlburt Field, where I went and was an instructor at the STTS for several years. I'm going to move faster through the rest of this because it was significantly less exciting. Then I went to AFSOC headquarters. Then I went back to Fort Benning for a second assignment, and I was the soup at the 17th and working at regimental headquarters then. Then I went back to AFSOC again. By then, I had made chief. And as we were discussing earlier, I just cruised through about 10 years, by the way, 8 years.
Yeah, but you're right, though. When you're like, it's kind of, it's not as sexy. It's like, well, just.
Yeah, it's not as sexy, but I'm grateful that I had like 7 deployments in 7 years between E4 and like E6. And man, that was the foundation of the rest of my military career. Okay. To the point that when I was a chief and I was at AFSOC headquarters, and we talked a little bit about this privately, but I was sent out to Peterson, what turned into Peterson Space Force Base, and I was assigned to what turned into the Space Force, primarily because of my expeditionary background. Okay, in the space community, a lot of missions, most of the missions, are performed from garrison. Okay, like all of the military satellites that we fly in LEO, low Earth orbit, those are flowing from Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado. And so we have entire organizations of guardians and airmen that their deployments are to Schriever. Okay. We have guardians and airmen that support launches. It's all done from CONUS. But space electronic warfare, that is done in an expeditionary setting because you have to get your equipment close to the adversary so you can create space electronic warfare effects. And so at the time that I went out, this is kind of how I ended up in space. And I like to effectively say, and no one can prove otherwise, that I was the first space ranger, right? Basically the first ranger tab in the Space Force, and I can say with certainty the first and last TACP assigned to the Space Force.
No, that's true. For sure, that's true.
I happened to be there, and I was one of the first chiefs in the Space Force, but they sent me to what was and is now Delta 3, which is a wing equivalent in the Space Force, because Delta 3's mission was space electronic warfare, and they needed a chief who had an expeditionary background and knew how to build training plans and prepare guardians for deployments. Okay. And so I knew my role there. Like I went back to my tactical experience. I was not a space expert. I was not the guy that they would call in the room and say, let's talk about like strategic space applications. But I was the guy when they said, hey, we just got an RFF for 20 Guardians to deploy to Central Africa to create space electronic warfare effects for an ODA. I'm like, okay, send it to me. Like, I can read that RFF and I can tell you what the ODA actually needs. Okay. And if it's not clear, like, I'll call that ODA and I'll ask them, tell me what you need, not what you think you want. Okay. Yep. Like, and then we'll build a deployment package around that. And so that was kind of my role. And I played that. It was, I think it's important to know what you're there to do. This is probably a good message for any active duty guys that are listening now, or for anyone in the business world. Like, understand what your role is and then just be the absolute best at it, right? Like, if you're E5 JTAC in Ramadi, you need to be the best at controlling CAS. That's what you need to do, okay? And if you're a Delta 3 chief that deploys people to expeditionary settings, that's what you need to focus on, right? And so I did that for several years. And in hindsight, that was one of the most enjoyable parts of my career beyond, the battlefield. It was standing up a new service. Like, man, what a historic, nerdy, and exciting time. I like to say it was the ultimate entrepreneurial experience. Like, you want to talk about starting a business?
Yeah.
Start a new military service, right? I used to have commanders. I worked for an 06. I'd have like squadron commanders come in and they'd want to talk to me before they talk to the boss. And they'd say, man, this is so frustrating. Like, we're expected to just know how to stand up this new service, and there's like no guidance coming. And I'd say, yeah, unfortunately, all the like smart books from the last time this was done in 1947 have been lost. Okay. There's no continuity books on how the Air Force broke off of the Army. And so, yes, you're right. We are actually doing this live. Okay. Suck it up. Enjoy the process a little bit along the way. This is a really big challenge and you get to solve it. How exciting is that? Right.
But the opportunity too is crazy.
Yeah.
Wherever there's a gap like that, the opportunity to fix all the things that we all complain about for our entire career, it's like, boom, we can fix this now.
Yep. That's right.
Yeah, you get to make it exactly what you want. All that scar tissue that you have from whatever service, because they brought in not just the Air Force folks, from what I understand. They brought in other, because there's a space component to the Army,
Yep.
and I know some of them swapped over as well. So
Yep.
like you can take all that bad stuff and just make it your own, make it what it should be.
Yep.
Like, and to give you an example, like for everybody, giving them an example of that is, in the Air Force, if somebody say you got a group of people, just say 10 people make master out of 20 people, right? 10 of 20. And that number 10 person that was the cut line, if they decide not to take the stripe or they get in trouble or something like that, in the Air Force, that stripe just goes away. It doesn't go on to the next person. Whereas the Space Force said, that's kind of dumb. Let's not do that. Okay, if that number 10 gets in trouble or decides to separate or whatever, then that number 11, they now get that stripe. Like, that's a good policy.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a good opportunity to do things different. And I loved it. And I worked for a great commander at the time. And it was, what was really fascinating to me, and he's a friend and I still talk to him often and see him. It was really interesting to me because in the space community, my observation and experience was that there's a pretty hard line. Let me preface this with, the space community is very officer heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so by the time you get to like E9, it is a very small amount of E9s in the space community. When the Space Force first stood up, the first 2 years, there was like 19 E9s in the Space Force. Okay.
Jeez.
And I was one of them. And so typically your senior officers, 06 and young generals, they are still doing operational level planning in space. Whereas in like special operations, it's very enlisted heavy, very senior NCO heavy. And the idea of like an 06 or an 07 doing operational planning and special operations, no way, man. And so what was really an enjoyable experience for me is that the commander who hired me, that was a nominative position, he kind of saw things differently and he wanted a special operations guy, and he would bring me to all of these meetings with him. And I would sit, against the wall. I knew my, place. But very often, like, I was the only enlisted guy in the room. And it wasn't because the other enlisted, the other senior enlisted leaders, like, didn't think it was important, but they just grew up in this space community where they're like, dude, that's a operational level meeting. That's what officers do. We don't go to those. And I would, and very often my commander at the time would ask, Chief, do you have anything to add to this? And I think he pushed a lot of his fellow commanders to employ their SELs more operationally, which was really critical in the early days of the Space Force standing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought very highly of him for that. I still do today. But naturally, as a SEL, what I spent a lot of my time doing, this is going to lead into Surf Brigade. What I spent a lot of my time doing, right? My mission was to make sure the commander had ready formations to deploy. Basically, that's basically every E9's job. Okay. Make sure your commander's formations are ready to go all the time. Okay. Physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, spiritually, whatever their skill set is. Okay. That's your job. Now, in an organization with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of enlisted people, what that meant was I spent most of my days solving OPPs, other people's problems. Okay. And some of these were good and reasonable things tied to, military qualifications and readiness. Hey, we need more money for training. We need more equipment. And I'd say, oh, this is the most important conversation I'm going to have today. Come in immediately, sit down, close the door, stop everything. Right. Some of them were, hey, I've got a troop who is experiencing financial problems. Okay, still got to solve that problem. I have a troop who has sobriety problems. Okay, still got to solve that problem. Family problems, domestic problems, legal problems, the relationship problems. It goes on and on. Okay. And what I started doing, I didn't fully understand what I was doing at the time. But my approach to solving problems, this goes back to my experience with special operations, was I thought if I could help people get to the root cause of their problem and understand why they were in this situation, then they could solve their own problems. Okay, that's what I thought. And so I had this giant whiteboard in my office. It's the biggest whiteboard you've ever seen. It was like my entire wall. Okay. And typically people would come in and say, hey, Chief, you got a minute? Right. It's never going to be a minute. I'd say, what you got, man? And they'd say, well, I have a problem and I need your help solving it. And so I would say, let's take it to the whiteboard. And I would start in the top left of the whiteboard with my marker. And I'd say, tell me what your problem is. And I'd write it down. And I'd ask them, how did we get here? And I'd write it down. How did we get here? And I'd write it down. How did we get here? And, sometimes 10, 12, 15, 30 layers deep, we'd be at the bottom of the board and I'd circle it and I'd say, that's your problem. You think this is your problem, but your problem is actually all the way down here. Everything above this is perceived solutions and coping mechanisms. If you do any of these, it doesn't actually solve your problem anyway. Your problem is all the way down here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, what that turned into, I kind of became known for doing that. Okay. And so over time, right, people would come in and they'd say, hey, I have a problem. And I'd say, you want to take it to the whiteboard? And I got to be honest, there were a lot of people who would look me right in the face and say, I don't want to do that. Okay. And what that really meant was like, they did not want to unpack their shit. And hey man, I was always objective about it. This was never an attack on anyone, but there were a lot of people who would say, I know I have a problem, but I do not want to go through that process. And I'd say, okay, well, then we have limited options. Okay. Because if you want me to help solve your problem, I'm going to solve the actual problem. I'm not going to participate in all of these other things above it. because that's not a good use of my time or resources, right? What that did, though, is it forced a lot of people to start solving their own problems.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I kind of, everybody has their own leadership style. And this was like my experience turning the knobs and finding my niche, right? I'd also ask people when they come in, people would, come in, hey, you got a minute? I'd say, I do, but I wasn't expecting you. And so if it's not an emergency, come back and see me at 1600. Okay. Now I did that because very often people, I don't say this to be disrespectful. Very often people are just lazy.
Yep.
And they want a quick answer. They want a quick fix. Okay. And so they go straight to the top and they're like, Chief can fix this. One phone call, done. And I'd say, hey man, if it's not an emergency, come back and find me at 1600. Now, anyone I ever said that to, I made sure I was available at 1600. Okay. I would even go and find them and say, hey, Johnny, it's 1600. Let's talk. And, remarkably, as you can imagine where I'm going with this, almost every time they'd say, you know what? It turns out that Danny had the answer and I solved the problem. No issues. Have a nice night. And I go, I'm glad to hear that. Okay. And so what I believe I created without a deliberate plan on the front side, what I had created by the time I left was an organization that was more aware of what their actual problems were. And they were investing their own resources in solving those at the bottom of the board and not allowing them to build up and advance. Because when that happens, okay, and this happens to everybody, by the way, especially post-military, which is why Surf Brigade was created. When that happens, like, man, sometimes if you don't even get on the board at some point, you can get so far away from what the root cause of the problem is, you may never get back to solving it. Right?
Yeah.
But at about the same time that I finally made all that happen, I retired.
Yeah.
You're welcome. There you go.
You're
out.
welcome. That was it. Because at that point, truthfully, I was at 23 years. We had been to, 3 bases in like 5 years, kids, and we were just ready to drop our anchor. And we did. And now we live permanently in Santa Rosa Beach, a mile from the beach, and life is good. And so
that's awesome.
What do you want to talk about military stuff before we sort of transition into that and Surf Brigade?
I actually want to hear about Surf Brigade. So let's do it.
Okay. So
they got sweet merch, first of all.
Oh, man, come on. Okay. So when I retired, I plugged right into the veteran community. It's easy to do down here. This is the 3rd densest veteran population in the country. Excuse me. We have 6 military bases in 60 miles here. And I think it's I'm a talkative guy. I get along with people, and I think people have a tendency to talk to me when they're experiencing some challenges in their life. Maybe it's just my nature. Okay. But what I realized, and I was basically taking veterans to the whiteboard when I first retired. Okay, guys I knew, some guys you guys know too, who were experiencing challenges. But the thing that jumped out at me right away was I didn't have resources to throw at anybody's problems like I did when I was a chief in the Air Force.
Yep.
If I got to the bottom of the board with an airman or guardian, and it turns out their problem was mental health or finance or whatever, like I could pick up the phone and call those offices on base and say, I need access to some resources to solve this problem, right?
Not when you call up as a retiree.
That's exactly right. And so I lost access to that. But what I realized pretty quickly was I was having the same conversations with different veterans about the same things, and a lot of them knew each other. And so with respect to their privacy, I didn't want to say like, hey, Peaches, you should talk to Trent because you're both crazy and you both have the same problems, but you guys are clearly not talking to each other. What I did instead was I started inviting guys out to the beach because I knew they all had things to talk about. I just had to get them all in one place at one time, and I had to get the juices flowing. Okay. And so I kind of, not ambushed everyone, but I told everyone, meet me at the beach. This was about 2 years ago, 2 summers ago. And I said, listen, I'm going to bring a truckload of surfboards and a bunch of firewood, and we're all going to surf at sunset. I don't care if you surf or swim or bodyboard or whatever. We're just all going to get in the water together. And when the sun sets, we're going to start a bonfire, bring your own chow, and we're going to hang out on the beach, man. And I didn't really have a deliberate plan on how to get the conversations going, but in a short amount of time, guys were talking about important things on the beach with each other. Okay. And after the first time I did this, I was getting feedback from those guys saying, hey, I really enjoyed that. I can't remember the last time I spent time doing something fun with another veteran. I can't remember the last time I allowed myself to be a little vulnerable with other guys my age. Okay. More importantly, guys afterwards saying, hey man, can you give me the phone number for that other guy? Because we talked about a job opportunity and maybe we're able to help each other out. And I realized something is happening here. Okay. And so a few months later, I invited a larger group of guys out to the beach and said, hey, we're going to do it again. We're going to bring more surfboards and more firewood and spread the word and bring everyone you know. Okay. And we did this for a year. And after doing this several times, it had grown so much. I mean, I had over 150 people coming to these events. I had to get permits from the county. I had a bonfire company managing this giant bonfire. I had surf company bringing out the boards. I had a catering company coming out to feed everyone. And the feedback I was getting then from the veterans, well, it was all family friendly. The veteran community then was saying, this is so amazing. However, I want to spend more time with the same group of veterans because we are getting into these really meaningful conversations, but it's hard to carry them on when my wife and kids are running around the beach, and it's hard to carry them on when there's so many distractions. Okay. And so I stepped back and I started writing. Okay. I'm kind of like a closet nerd, and I publish books and I write books. And so I kind of stepped back and started writing. What is everybody talking about around the fire? What is at the bottom of the board? And what I realized was it was the same three things over and over again. It was purpose, narrative, and community. Every conversation tied back to one of these three things. And so I literally wrote a book on purpose, narrative, and community. I published it. I incorporated what is now Surf Brigade. I started generating the necessary resources for us to execute what is now 5-week classes where we take teams of 10 veterans, the same 10 veterans, and they participate in a 5-week class where during that time, every single week, they have a guided group discussion on a single topic with prescribed reading and exercises surrounding purpose, narrative, and community. And every Saturday morning, they surf together. What this does is it creates a bond between these 10 veterans because they are doing something together in the ocean, learning something hard together, wiping out together, having some successes together. They are getting closer. And what that allows them to do is be more open and vulnerable with each other and reach deeper levels of conversation surrounding these topics, okay? Because if I just took a bunch of military veterans and said, I want you all to spend the next 5 weeks having really vulnerable conversations about yourself, dude, it would never happen.
Beat it, nerd. I'm out.
Beat it, nerd. That's exactly right. It just doesn't happen. But it's amazing. And we can talk about this, like the effect that the ocean has on you, if you're aware of what you're doing there together, can open you up in ways that a lot of other environments don't. Okay. One of the reasons I explain this to veterans so they understand, like, the military creates this. I actually don't think that the military talks about this enough. I think this is something that needs to be addressed. And I say everything I'm saying, I caveat with, I'm not a clinical expert. Okay. However, I have written a manualized therapy program that is published, and it has been shadowed and verified by a clinical psychologist. And so I know that all of the tools and techniques that Surf Brigade applies have been verified, and they're valid from a therapeutic perspective. But what I don't think the military talks enough about is the military creates I don't know if this is the right clinical word. It creates a circadian rhythm in your life that carries on with you post-military. Okay, what that means is every 3 to 4 years in the military, you move to a new organization, a new state, a new part of the country, a new country.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does over the course of 20 years, 25 years, 30 years is it creates these patterns in your psyche where you get somewhere new and you think, okay, in the next 12 months, I need to keep my head down and become the expert at whatever my job is in this unit right here, right now. And a year into it, you say, okay, I have figured my shit out. Now I'm going to spend the next 2 years training all the new guys and prepping the organization for my departure. And you spend your last year thinking about, where am I going next? Researching, what are my options? How do I position myself to be competitive for the best of those? I have to start researching school systems and neighborhoods and jobs. Okay. And then when you get to that next place, you start it all over again.
Yep.
Okay. And your wives do this too. And your kids do this too. And the thing is, most civilians will only move once or twice in their entire adult life. We move every 2 to 4 years for 20 to 30 years. That creates a pattern, these long wavelengths, just like our sleeping patterns create on a daily basis. Okay? The challenge with that post-military for a lot of veterans is a lot of veterans fantasize about like getting out of the military and never moving again. They're like, oh, dude, when I get out, I'm done. Okay? And then remarkably, 2 or 3 years post-military, they go, why am I on Zillow looking at new houses in new locations?
That's
Why
not
am
just us. My wife does the same thing. We've been here 2 years, and she was just telling me last night. She's like, yeah, I found some new some nice houses. I'm like, why are you on Zillow? She's like, I just it's what I'm conditioned to do, and I just enjoy looking at houses. I'm like,
that's exactly right. That is something that probably, I don't know what the solution is to that, but that's something that we don't talk enough about, is to help veterans understand in advance, like, listen, you have been trained to move every 2 to 4 years your entire life. When you're out of the military, you are going to have the urge to continue doing that, but you need to understand what the risk of continuing to do that is, because you don't have the systems and processes in place to sustain that like you
Yep.
did when you were in the military.
Yeah.
Okay. So what Surf Brigade does with its curriculum, right? This is actually a manualized program, as I mentioned. We talk about purpose, and we talk about narrative, and we talk about community. And I want to tell you guys about those individually so you understand our approach to those. But I want to pause there for a minute to see if you have any questions about anything so far.
I mean, I'm tracking everything you're putting down, and it all makes sense to me right now. And I'm more thankful that somebody's doing it,
Yeah.
and that's not to mean that there's one answer for everything, and that, it can be a convoluted, for lack of better words, market, right? But that's almost in a good thing, because not everybody is into hunting, not everybody is into surfing, not everybody is into X, Y, and Z, because there's a bunch of different things on there.
Yeah.
So having the options to be able to go like, hunting's not really my thing, but you know what I love to do? I grew up surfing, so let me, like, Surf Brigade is perfect. Oh, and it's right down the road from me.
Yep. Well, let me also tell you, surfing is our catalyst. Okay. Surfing is what gets us all together, but it's our curriculum that is most important. Okay. This is not a surf club. This is not surf lessons. Surfing is what gets us in the water together. And truthfully, some guys come out and they don't surf, but being in the water is what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And, back real quick to the circadian rhythm, like, I try to help veterans understand, when you spend so many years of your life in constant motion, the ocean can actually be a very comforting environment because it is also in constant motion. Some people like to sit on the side of a mountain and look out over a valley because it doesn't move at all, and they feel still. But a lot of veterans don't do well in that environment. Some veterans don't do well when you sit them down and say, don't do anything.
Yep.
Don't move. Don't think. That's not how we were raised up to be. And in the ocean, it's always moving. The current is going in one direction, the waves in a second direction, and the wind in a third. And the remarkable thing is, like, you can't fight it, man. Like, you are not in charge. When you're in the ocean, you are not in charge of what is happening. The best you can do is learn how to navigate it.
That's
Okay.
a deployment. It's out there trying to kill you. You just are doing what you're told, and you're just flowing through it and trying to get home at some
That's
point.
exactly right. And a great example is, we had a guy who came out to one of our events. He was recently retired. He was going through a divorce. He was going through had some relationship issues with alcohol. And he was, afterwards, what we talked about is he was basically bottling it all up and not talking to anyone. Okay. And while everyone else was surfing, he didn't bring a surfboard out. He just went out this is a guy, you probably know this guy, most of us, and he's our age. He looks just like us. And he's standing in waist deep water. And as the waves are hitting him, he's punching the waves. Almost like a kid would do, like a 6-7-year-old boy would do. And I saw him doing this, and I was like, okay, man, that's what he needs to do right now. And over the next 20 to 40 minutes, he was like having a fight with the waves. Okay. And he was very clearly letting a lot of emotion out, and it made him emotional, punching these waves. And when we all got on the beach later and we talked about it, he said, man, I don't know what happened out there. Like some switch flipped, and I went from just jumping over waves to punching them to to having an emotional experience. And he said, I realized now that I am bottling a lot up, and I need to probably talk to someone about this. And I said, yeah, man, I think you're right. Okay. But if you don't want to talk to like a clinical expert, like come sit at the fire with us and at least talk to some of your battle buddies here. Okay. But you do need to talk to somebody. And that's why we're in the water together. Like it gets us all in one place at one time. I don't care how good you are at surfing. I don't care if you even have a surfboard. If you just want to bring your fins out and swim around, it's just what gets us there. Okay. But when we're having these conversations, okay, when we're getting into the curriculum, the three things we talk about are purpose, narrative, and community. And the reason why we talk about purpose is in the military, a lot of military members experience a very extreme sense of purpose. I call this pegging the purpose needle. We take young men and women and we trust them to do very challenging things and ask them to make huge sacrifices in their life. They spend long periods of time away from their family. They live in substandard conditions. They're solving hard challenges. And these are all very formidable experiences for them as individuals. But they do it willingly and they volunteer to do it because they feel an extreme sense of purpose in all of these things. Okay. That comes with a big responsibility for us as leaders, because what we have to be aware of is every time we ask somebody to make a big sacrifice and they do it, they push that purpose needle a little further. Okay. For example, and the more specialized your military career is or was, the more prevalent this is. Okay. If you're in the military and an upcoming deployment happens to fall over your anniversary and your kid's birthday and Christmas, and most civilians would say, there's no way I'm going to miss all of those things. I don't care how much this new job opportunity pays. No way. But in the military, we find the override button and we go, override, because this is important and my country needs me to do this. Okay. Then later in our careers, maybe we sustain some sort of major injury where most civilians would say, I just was injured doing my job. And there's a chance that if I keep doing this job, I'm going to get injured again and it's going to get worse. I don't want to do this job anymore. But we, once again, go override. Maybe one day we watch one of our teammates lose a limb, lose an eye, or we lose one of our teammates and we say, holy shit, he died doing something I am going to continue doing. Most civilians would say, there's no way I will ever do that again. And we go, override. Okay. Every time we hit the override button, we bury that needle a little more. And eventually we have military members who have this purpose needle just absolutely redlined. It's like being behind the wheel of 1,000 horsepower race car and you just have the pedal to the metal holding the wheel, just grasping it. And everybody is going, dude, bad things are happening all around you. And you go, bam, you're just hitting the gears the whole time. Okay?
It's a great analogy.
The problem with that, and by the way, our spouses are wearing their 5-point harness in the seat right next to us, looking at us. Our kids are in the back seat, and we're hitting the nitrous button, just going for gold. Sometimes our spouses are looking at us going, your friend died doing that, and you're going to keep doing it? And you look right at them and say, yes.
Yep.
These things are not normal. FYI. Okay? But we normalize them. The problem with that is one day you get out of the military and you're leading a very good life. You have a good job with a great company. You're making good money. And you feel like your RPMs are at 1,000 and you're in a minivan going through a school zone. And you all of a sudden have a purpose problem because your needle is all the way down here. Okay? In reality, most other lifelong civilians your age, man, that's where their needle is their whole life. That's normal for them. But because you redlined that needle for so many years of your life, this huge gap in between is a danger zone. That's where we start making bad decisions. We start justifying bad behaviors. We start doing reckless things because we are looking for purpose. The reality is I'm saying this with confidence. The reality is post-military, you're never going to redline that needle the way you did. Okay? We have to agree on that. And what we have to do instead is help veterans understand, listen, you probably need to get that needle right in the middle. You're probably going to get it there from several sources of purpose, not the way it was in the military where it was a single stream of purpose the entire time. Instead, now it's probably going to be your job, maybe a little bit of coaching, a little bit of volunteering, a lot more family time, a vision for your future, some hobbies. But when you stitch together that plan and you figure out how to get those RPMs, that purpose needle right in the middle, keep it there. Okay? Don't expect for it to get redlined. Okay? Your baseline is different than everyone else's, but it's never going to be what it was. And if you try to get it there, you're probably going to endanger yourself and everyone around you.
No, that checks. That definitely checks. And so with the pillars, so that's the purpose pillar. And you said the second one is the narrative?
Second one is narrative. What narrative is it's a storyline that explains to others how you fit into society. That's what narrative is.
Okay.
In the military, we are basically given our narrative. Okay? People look at Kevin and they say, you are in the Air Force, you're a chief, I can tell your advanced qualifications, I can tell what unit you're assigned to. I don't really have to explain things to people a lot, okay? The problem with that is over the course of 20 years and not having to explain yourself to other people is one day when you're out of the military, it can be challenging for a lot of veterans to actually do that for the first time. When people say, Kevin, tell me a little bit about yourself. And people are tripping over their own words and they're saying, I used to, and now they don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Well, because if I tell you what I did, I can use like 16 words, and
Right. Yep.
There's like a lot behind it, and you understand what that means. Now you go to a civilian, and I'm just hopping on because I've had this experience. They're like, oh, what did you do? I'm like, I was a weather nerd that jumped out of plane, like blah blah blah. And they're like, well, what does that mean? And it's like, I don't know. I've never had to say this before in my life. And also, like, you don't get to make jokes about it. Like I can, and my bros can, but like, like you find yourself in this weird place where you're trying to like not sound cool, but also you're like, no, hey, nerd that works at the school that my kids go to, you don't get to like make jokes about this. It's there's a lot that goes into it, and you have to find a way to explain it to make yourself not really upset about the reactions.
Yeah, that's right. You can't like tell dead baby jokes at the ball field with a bunch of civilians, right? It
Right.
doesn't land well with them. But the problem is, if you are not aware of what your narrative is and able to explain it to others in a short amount of time, it can start to affect your confidence. It can start to affect your entire mentality. And it can put you in a very vulnerable position where you start looking for a new narrative. Okay. Some example, by the way, civilians would call this a midlife crisis. Okay. Some examples that we've probably all seen is, you know, a guy gets out of the military in 2 years and he's never had a motorcycle in his life. And 2 years later, he's a hardcore biker in a motorcycle club. And you go, dude, what? Where did this come from? Now, the reality is, man, he's looking for a narrative and he finds his identity in that environment. And so he moves towards it because he can plug in and he can wear those motorcycle clothes. People don't, he doesn't have to explain to others, man, I'm a biker. Like that's who I am. Okay. This happens even in the military. There are times when guys get pulled out of their units or pulled out of their communities and they have a bit of an identity crisis even while they're in the military. And this starts to manifest in ways that we see even then. Okay. But much like purpose, it is non-negotiable. This is a fact for veterans that when you get out of the military, your narrative is going to change. And so in our book, we make veterans write their narrative 5 times. Write it. And then step away from it. And then come back, cross it out, jumble it up, stitch it back together a second time. And then a third time. And then a fourth time. And then a fifth time. And by then, you're probably a little closer to what your actual narrative is at that point in your life. But no one is going to knock on your door and say, hey, Mr. Laliberte, I hope you're enjoying retirement. I would just like to check in and see if you have figured out what your new narrative is yet. If you don't do it on your own, it's not going to get done. And you don't want to be in a critical part of your life and realize, I don't know what my narrative is, and put yourself at risk of making bad decisions. We need to stay ahead of that.
And I think that narrative, I mean, like the 3 pillars, you know, purpose, obviously we can all relate to that. Narrative, we can definitely relate to that. And I think definitely with the narrative in community, like that, like those are very, purpose almost stands on its own.
Yeah.
But the narrative and community aspect of it are very closely aligned, especially using the analogy of the motorcycle club kind of thing, you know, because not only do you have the narrative, you have the community in that as well.
That's right. Moving into community, when we're in the military, we spend an inordinate amount of time around people who are just like us. Okay? Even in the most diverse military organizations, 75% of the people are 75% the same. You're 75% the same age. You make 75% the same money. You have 75% the same mission. You drive 75% the same cars.
Easy.
You listen to 75% the same music. Your spouses probably look 75% the same. Okay? The reason why this is actually necessary is from a change management perspective. When you move every 2 to 4 years, you need to be able to show up to a new unit and be 75% like everyone else when you walk in the front door. If it wasn't that way, the entire military would be in a perpetual state of storming. Nothing would ever get done because you would be in this terrible change management process the entire time. You need people to show up. You need to burr the edges off, get them settled in, and hit the performing part of change management in a very short amount of time. If you looked at a profit-based organization and said, every 4 years, I'm going to change out 75% of your entire company, they would
That's
say,
a terrible model.
no way. We would never make any money. Okay. But we do it in the military all the time. Now, that's also important when you add things in like adversity, challenges. Okay. We need to be able to rely on each other. We need to be a lot like each other. We need to have shared hardships and backgrounds. And the result of all of this is we become very close with each other. Okay. Within our communities, we rely on each other in ways that most civilians never would. Okay. Even our spouses, the wife's group, they rely on each other in ways that civilian organizations never would. The problem with that, again, is one day you're out of the military and not everyone is 75% like you anymore. You move to a new town and your kids are on teams and your spouses have jobs and you have a job, and you look around and go, God, I'm working with people who are like 65 years old. I'm working with people who are 20 years old. I got people that are younger than me making more money than me. I'm navigating conversations with people that have never been in the military before. They don't know that I was a weather nerd. This is challenging. And a lot of veterans just go, fuck it, man. I don't feel like explaining myself to all these people. And so I'm just not going to say anything at all. Okay. The risk with that is if you are experiencing a purpose problem and or a narrative problem, at the same time, you're navigating a community problem. This can lead to isolation. It can lead to detachment from your peers, your friends, even your family. And it can put you at significant risk of making selfish decisions. And you start to justify them. And people start to say things like, yeah, I know I'm not investing in spending time with other people. I know I'm spending recklessly or participating in high-risk activities, or I'm abusing substances. But you know what? I fucking deserve to do that. Okay? Because it's hard, man.
Mm-hmm.
That's problematic. And most people would not blame somebody who's experiencing that. But what Surf Brigade wants to do is get everybody in the water where we can identify those things and talk about them together and agree that we are all going to navigate these at some point. In these 5 weeks we spend together, we always have people who are on opposite ends of the spectrum. Some people who are really excelling and they're like, dude, I'm at the best part of my life right now. And other people who are in the trenches together. But when we're in the water together, when we're in the lineup together, dude, everybody's equal. Okay? Like we say, the ocean gives everybody the same waves. It doesn't give a shit if you're a pro surfer or a newbie. It doesn't care if you make $10 an hour or $1,000 an hour. The ocean gives everybody the same waves. Okay? But the final thing that I want to turn this over for discussion here in a minute. What surfing does, okay, is it allows us to talk in analogies that are applicable to everyone. Because when we're out there experiencing surfing together, experiencing the ocean together, we can take the lessons that we are all navigating in the water together as equals and apply those on land as well. And we can help everyone understand, like, listen, if it's a big day and it's hard to get past the inside, like, dude, you need to encourage each other. You need to communicate. Like, when's the next wave coming? If somebody looks like they're having a hard time, paddle over and give them a hand. If you find a riptide and you can get in it on a surfboard and let it suck you out without you having to work harder and save your energy, let your battle buddies know and go get in it. But guess what? Do all that on land as well. Okay?
Yep.
Do it all for each other there also. That's how Surf Brigade measures success, right? It's not by how well people are surfing at the end of 5 weeks. It's how well we are all navigating life together as a veteran community post-military. Over.
Yeah, and we've talked about it ad nausea. Really, is it's good to see the positive aspect of the veteran community to come and help itself, because conversely, it can be a very tear you down, eat your own, fuck you, I'm not supporting you. For what is seemingly unnecessary reasons,
Yep.
of course, oh, I feel slighted about something, or you said something about tourniquets I didn't like, or you said, it, it's just wild. Now all of a sudden you're P&G'd from something, or presumably, and you're like, man, it's just wild. And how come, and I'll just use I'll use JT with Black Rifle Coffee. However people feel about him, he has put the TACP community on the map, as well as at least from a public aspect, right? And he's given a lot back to the TACP Association and Foundation, but he catches so much fucking heat. It's wild, and some of it is brought on by himself, right? Some of it is he is provocative for a reason. He wants to be, Same with there's other people that, whether it's Jay Dorlius in the Green Gray community, there's Jocko, there's Goggins, there's all these people. And it's just, instead of kind of like, hey man, I don't necessarily agree with every message, we just decide to tear people down. It's a weird place to be in, which is nice that the analogy you're using in the way that you guys do it with Surf Brigade is, hey, everybody gets the same waves. The ocean does not care who you are, what your background is, what you do, what you're going through right now. It's going to treat you the exact same as everybody else. And then if you do see somebody struggling, you go out there and help them. If you get a new tip, trick, riptide, or rip current taking you out, like, all those things are great, and they definitely translate into the land for sure, to everyday life. So it's fantastic.
Yep. Yeah. The interesting part of all of this is when you offer to help people, you have to, this is probably very important for everyone to understand, not just from a nonprofit perspective. When you offer to help people, you have to be willing to help people the way that they need to be helped, not the way that you want to help them. Okay? But it's also important to be responsible enough to understand what you can and cannot help with. And so in Surf Brigade's case, we have a strategic relationship with SOF, which makes cost-free clinical mental health care available to veterans, totally anonymous as well. And so when veterans are coming through our program, if they have a real need that is mental health related, that is beyond the beach, like, we're at least honest with them to tell them, like, hey man, this is a real issue that surfing is not going to solve, but we do have resources available. And so we want to put you in touch with our clinical staff that can help you get plugged into the long-term clinical or medical treatment that you actually need. Right. But yeah, you're exactly right, Peaches. I mean, if you make noise, like, man, people are going to respond. Not everybody responds well, but you have to be willing to take the heat sometimes and let it roll off your back and keep helping other people. Because if you just shut down every time, someone had one negative thing to say, you'd never be able to positively help a much larger group of people.
Yep.
Even
Exactly.
now with Surf Brigade, I have other nonprofits that reach out and they have critical things to say. and I have others that have lots of long list of ideas of what Surf Brigade should be doing. And I always thank them and say, hey, I appreciate the time that you put into thinking about this. Okay. And I'll consider it, but it doesn't mean that doesn't mean that Surf Brigade is going to make a course correction every time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So where can we find, or where can people find Surf Brigade, and how can they help Surf Brigade?
Great questions. Website is surfbrigade.com. LinkedIn as well, Surf Brigade. Facebook and Instagram, Surf Brigade Official. And we're on X at Surf BDE for Surf Brigade. Okay. Everyone who wants to help, you can make a tax deductible donation anytime on the website. We have several fundraisers throughout the year as well. And probably the easiest way, Trent's teeing it up right now, is you can buy apparel. That's right, looking good. You can buy apparel and you can buy surf equipment. We manufacture our own surfboards here in the United States, as well as leashes, a full line of shirts, hats, sweatshirts, rash guards, and the list goes on. And all of the money goes right back into our program.
Wait, leashes are for surfboards, right?
Say again?
Leashes are for surfboards, not for something else?
You can use it for whatever you want, but these are designed to be surf leashes. We do manufacture our own surfboards. These are similar surfboards that you find the biggest surf companies in the United States making as well. Super high quality is what we use in our program. And we make those available for sale also. But as I mentioned, all proceeds from all sales go right back into our surf therapy program for veterans.
Well, Kevin, I just want to say, I don't think we had ever met when we were active duty, but I'd heard your name before, and it seems from everything that I knew about you from the rumor mill was you just kept doing what you were doing while you were active duty. Like there's certain people, I don't think you ever lost your focus of helping people and trying to make everything better. And I think this is just the next great step in everything that you've done. So not to like blow smoke up your butt, but like, you hear people, reputations and the way people speak about, other people in the community. And this falls right in line with everything else I think that you did for the 23 years that you were in. So I think this is awesome. And I can't wait to see where it goes.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that, Trent. And I appreciate you guys. Trent and I are already, at the VFW playing bingo with the other retirees on Wednesday nights. Peaches is still in the trenches. But soon you too will have, a bandolier full of dabbers and be on the other side with us. But I appreciate what you guys are doing. And I appreciate what you're doing with this podcast too. Giving a lot of veterans a voice and allowing them to hear important messages that they might not be getting otherwise. And so, keep it up. And thank you for allowing Surf Brigade to share its message here on your platform today.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time out to not just join us, but do what you're doing with Surf Brigade. So to everybody that's out there, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, leave us comments, go find and follow Surf Brigade on Instagram, LinkedIn, go visit surfbrigade.com, order some merch, make a donation, and we'll go from there. All right, everybody. See you later.
Bye.